for the first time that I'm aware, we have the deep front line or core line, at least a piece of it, a big piece of it, and a long piece of it. And we start with the flexor digitorum longus with the little quadratus plantae attached to it, the tendon, the tibialis posterior with some of its hand-like attachments for the arch, and of course the flexor hallucis longus. The tendons have been uncrossed here so that you see the muscles going straight into the deep posterior compartment that fills in. It's kind of rough here because this was right up against the interosseous membrane and the surfaces of the tibia and fibula. This goes into the fascia clearly. It's just hooked right into the fascia of the popliteus, and that crosses over the back of the knee capsule. We're including the capsule here, and there would have been, except it got cut in the dissection, the continuity of the neurovascular bundle coming across the back of the knee here. What we have in here, to see exactly where, is the lowest attachment of that strong attachment right there of the adductor magnus. The adductor magnus comes up behind us in the picture here. Here is the intermuscular septum between the adductors and what's left here of the vastus medialis. But if we fold that back, opening the book of this septum, we see the septum and its continuity into the iliacus muscle. So we have the iliacus muscle here, the psoas muscle beside it, the nerve, and the blood vessel would be here also, except that got taken out, and the pectineus muscle. The pectineus muscle has a continuity with the, perhaps you can see it here, the psoas minor. The iliacus has a continuity as we come up here, the proximal portion, the medial portion, with the quadratus lumborum. That interfaces clearly without reference. We've taken, obviously, there's no ribs here. You can see the interface between the crura of the diaphragm, the root of the diaphragm anyway, and the quadratus lumborum. The actual crura of the diaphragm have been removed from the front of the spine so that you can see interface between the psoas and the diaphragm, or holding the diaphragm out here so that you can see the domes, and there's no question of a connection between the psoas and the diaphragm. Now if we can just let this drop and move above, we see that the diaphragm is very clearly held to the pericardium of the heart, and the whole mediastinal tissues here, which we would have to dissect in detail to see, of the connection between the heart and the lungs. So we just say that this whole connective tissue of the mediastinum comes up into the visceral cylinder of the neck. This person, if you see here, had had a tracheotomy either just before or sometime before he died. And here we see the floor of the mouth, so beautifully dissected by Todd, so that we can see the geniohyoid. And finally, this structure at the top is his tongue. So having the tongue as part of this deep front line, we would, if we pulled this back and looked in the front, see the anterior longitudinal ligament and the front of the spine, the muscles, the longus colli. But we have really dissected out here the visceral component of the deep front line. The hyoid muscles in the front, the visceral cylinder of the esophagus and trachea, and we were able to take it with the tongue and the throat. And there you can see the tongue is the most forward thrusting muscle of the visceral self. And I just really am so grateful to Todd for taking this out, and I find it quite unbelievable to see this whole thing in one long line. It even looks longer than a person, doesn't it?
He was a long person.
He was a long person, but he looks even longer
Yeah.
now. Oh, it's because those tendons are so extended out.
Tom, I think it'd be great if we go back over to Peter and you point out the few structures that are in the spine,
Yeah.
and then we put it back in, and you can just
Okay.
talk to us as we put
All
it
right,
in.
so here what we're looking at is the negative space created by the removal of the deep front line. Looking at the thoracic abdominal cavity together. So here we see the spine, just to orient ourselves, Here is the costal arch under the ribs. The xiphoid process would be here. And if you can see it, the crest of the ilium here. And looking up into the ever narrowing set of ribs, like the set of boat ribs of the rib cage, we end up here with the thoracic inlet right at the top. However, we've taken all the viscera away, so we can see through all the way up to the top of the back of the throat, the top of the neck, where it meets the skull. Now, what we're going to do while you watch is simply put the deep front line back in place. So, if we create the space here, I want to that you see where the front of the hip is in the body as we put this in. All of our little helpers.
Start up there, David. So
You're probably going to bring this through.
okay, go ahead.
So we'll slip the lungs and the heart up into, and the tongue back into the mouth, so that we can see here the hyoid bone and the digastric, mylohyoid, geniohyoid. And then if we slip the bulk of the muscles back into place, we see the whole crura of the diaphragm attaching to the front of the bodies and discs of the lumbar and thoracic spine. We see the quadratus lumborum, I do that with a probe, the diaphragm, quadratus lumborum, iliacus slipping into the iliac fossa, the psoas major, and if I pull it up, the psoas minor connecting down into the lacunar ligament and thus into the pectineus. Now as we come down the inside of the leg, we'll see the adductors, the adductor longus and magnus get tucked into the inside of the leg, almost underneath the vastus medialis, with the adductor longus that you can always feel the tendon, and underneath we would see the adductor magnus, but it is towards the back of the leg. Now, this is going to be a little harder to see unless we can turn the leg so. We would come across the back of the knee, popliteus, and then fill in this very deep groove in the back of the leg with these three muscles, Tom, Dick, and Harry, tibialis posterior, flexor hallucis longus, and flexor digitorum longus, whose tendons would curl around the inside of the ankle and establish themselves to the bottom of the foot and the toes. Of course, the Achilles tendon and the soleus and gastrocnemius would be on the outside of that. All in all, we have gone from the underside of the toes to the tongue, or the very bottom of the head, with one long fascial plane that is completely connected and dissectable out. The deep front line.